Good morning, everyone. My name is John Hagan. I'm chair of the Maine Climate Table. Um, and if you weren't at event one last Thursday, the beginning of our fall series, you can see I'm still in Hannaford Hall. I moved from the balcony down to the main floor because no one was here. But this is the venue that we were supposed to have a day-long summit this fall featuring climate leadership in Maine's business community. And of course, you all know what happened to that plan. But we did decide to not let the pandemic stop us from having this climate conversation anyway. So we took the date, what was going to be a day-long event, and converted it into 4 two-hour online sessions. And so today is the second of those 4 sessions. We're really glad to have you with us today. Last week was fantastic. If you missed it, you can watch it if you just go to our website. Very interesting conversation. Great keynote by Adam Lee, who said we can solve this problem if we want to. We've done hard things before. Just to frame this up a little bit, the Maine business sector makes up over 80% of Maine's economy. There's just no way the state of Maine is going to meet its 80% reduction in greenhouse gas goal by 2050 without the leadership and the participation of the Maine business community. So we set up this fall series to learn from and learn with Maine business leaders. They're on the front lines of climate change every day, especially natural resource businesses. They have to solve a myriad of problems every day just to stay in businesses, and climate is just one more of the things they have to deal with. The idea today, we've got 2 panels today. The idea is to learn from our business leaders what's worked, what maybe hasn't worked, and learn what they might need to make it easier to take on climate change. We have 2 one-hour panels featuring 7 different Maine businesses. The first panel will be about Maine's natural resources. The second panel will feature larger Maine businesses that have a reach well beyond the borders of Maine, even though they're well-known names to us in Maine. And again, like last week, let me just make a comment about COVID and thank all of our business partners for their willingness to be here today and do this. I know everybody's confronting the challenges of just getting through each day, and to the credit of our panelists, they wanted to continue with this event today. So thank you for that. Before we get started with our first panel, just a couple of logistics. At the bottom of your screen should be a Q&A button, and you can click on that at any time and type in a question that you have for the panelists. We'll hold them in the queue until the last 15 minutes or so of each panel, and then the moderator or I or both will pose your questions to the panelists. So at any time from now on, type in a question, it'll be held there, and we'll come back to it with the panelists in the last part of their session. So, okay, let's get going with the first panel, and I'm going to introduce Andy Whitman. Andy's Director of Sustainable Economies Program at Manomet. Andy works mainly with businesses all kinds of businesses to measure and manage for sustainability, including, of course, greenhouse gas emissions. Andy has all projects involving all 3 of Maine's major natural resource sectors, which is why he's the perfect moderator for today. And he also has an unusual gift. I've worked with Andy a long time, has an unusual gift for seeing the commonalities across seemingly disparate topics. So Andy, hopefully you're there in the Zoom universe, you can turn your camera on, and I'll let you sort of frame up this first session and then introduce your panelists, and I'm going into the background here. Andy, floor is yours.
Great, thank you, John. Good morning. Thank you for that very good, nice introduction, and for the opportunity to explore with this panel sort of the ramifications of climate change for the natural resource sector in Maine. And thank you all out there and Zoom land for joining us this morning on this particularly sunny and what would have been a couple of decades ago, somewhat warmer, slightly unseasonable weather. So as many of you know, the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming ocean areas in the world. Because Maine's northern latitude, Maine overall is experiencing some of the fastest rates of climate change of anywhere in the nation. In the woods, you know, what we're experiencing is it's becoming more difficult to access the resource, the timber resource for winter harvest, because there's greater uncertainty as to whether or not the ground is frozen sufficiently to get equipment in. I think everybody's aware of the drought that we're facing and have some appreciation for the impacts it's having on agriculture in this state, and how extreme weather with rainfall events can impact our shellfish and aquaculture industry in terms of being able to get product to market. You can't point to any one of these things and say, aha, it's climate change. But we do know that over a decade ago, climate change scientists were predicting that these phenomena would become more common and become a growing challenge in Maine and elsewhere in the Northeast. So something's up. And I knew 10 years ago after leading a climate change conference, when I went home to cut my grass in Bath, Maine in November, something I'd never done before, I realized that Maine had departed from the climate of our childhood. Well, it's easy to consider the threats of climate change and sort of feel a little bit of shock or worry depending on your feelings on the issue. It's imperative that we also consider the opportunities if we're going to build an economy that's really resilient to climate change. Moreover, you know, recent reports suggest that Maine's natural resource economy actually stands to benefit and benefit more than anywhere else in the country. It has the potential of actually being a net positive for our natural resource industry. So we have to think about the opportunities if we want to have a resilient economy. I'd like to introduce today's panel for a lively conversation about climate change, the natural resource sector, and the challenges and opportunities that we face. These are companies and people who are sort of at the forefront of climate change adaptation, and even mitigation in our natural resource sector. And so I welcome them today. We can bring the panelists up. So I'll start with Bill Mook. Bill is owner and the founder of Mook Sea Farm and Hatchery in Walpole, Maine. His hatchery annually produces over 100 million juvenile oyster seeds to sell to growers up and down the East Coast. He also raises quality oysters to sell in restaurants across the state and beyond. He was recently awarded NRCM's 2018 Conservation Leadership Award in recognition for his advocacy work for clean water and a healthy climate. Bill is truly a pioneer in climate change adaptation, as you'll hear more this morning. Then I'd like to introduce Jenni Tilton-Flood, who's a dairy farmer at Flood Brothers Farm in Clinton, Maine. The Flood Farm has been in agricultural production over 200 years and is currently operated by 3 generations of family members. The Flood Brothers is the largest dairy farm in Maine. Jenni's been a strong proponent of using methane digesters to produce energy from cow manure and also help reduce potentially the impact of food waste. And finally, I'd like to introduce Greg Adams. Greg is recently retired as manager of research and development at J.D. Irving, the largest forest company in the Maritimes in northern Maine. Greg led Irving's tree improvement program for more than 25 years. He has long led the use of science to advance sustainable forest management. He was recently awarded the 2017 Forester Achievement Award in recognition for the meaningful impact he has had throughout his career as a researcher, mentor, advocate, and leader. So with that, I'd like to so jump into the panel. And actually, what I'd like to do is for the panel to talk a little bit about themselves, to help the audience better understand just who you are. If you, maybe I'll start with you, Jenny, but if each of you could sort of start by telling me briefly a little bit about what your company does and your role in your company.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Andy and John. Our family farm really is in the business of putting food on our neighbors' tables. We take care of our cows, we take care of our land, and it produces milk, and that milk travels less than 100 miles, is pasteurized, bottled, and is on store shelves within 24 to 48 hours. We're providing sustainable nutrition, the opportunity for people to add a little something extra to their life beyond just subsistence nutrition as well. Great tasting, delicious, cheese, ice cream, all the things that we love, but also providing a huge economic engine to our regional and local economies, as most of our 198 dairy farms here in the state do. Part of the equation is also making sure that we maintain the land that we've been entrusted with. And that includes making sure that the generations to follow and new generations that want to get into farming have good, healthy soils, healthy waterways, and an environment that they can use to not only drive the economy, but sustain and nourish their communities with the food and the benefits of the land. On our farm, I pretty much do whatever I'm asked to. I've started out as the person delivering parts here, and I'm also the person that if they need someone in a tractor, I'm the gal. If they need someone behind a camera, I'm the gal. I'm just one piece of a 21 family member system working with 40 other employees.
Jenny. Bill, do you want to jump in and tell us briefly a little bit about your company and your role there?
Sure. I started Mook Sea Farm in 1985, so we've been in business 35 years. Started with myself and one employee and have built the business up over all those years. So we now employ about 30 people. We have sort of two right now and almost three aspects to our business. We produce baby oyster seed that we sell from all up and down the East Coast, as far south as North Carolina, all the way up into Maine. We supply, seed oysters to probably well over 100 farms. And that has a pretty big economic impact because, as people may know, there's been, over the last 2 decades, quite a renaissance in oyster farming and in oyster production in the eastern part of the U.S. as well as the western part of the U.S. And we also have probably 45 to 50 acres of leases on the Damascus River, where we rear the seed that we produce, our own seed that we produce in the hatchery to market size. And we sell those oysters all over the country. They go to pretty much every major metropolitan area in the U.S. So that's about it. And my role there is I've done everything. As I've gotten older and approaching retirement, I'm more behind a computer and a desk, but I'm the owner and CEO, I guess, would be CEO or president. We don't really go by titles. But every now and then I'll empty the trash.
Thank you, Bill. Greg, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just by way of background on J.D. Irving. J.D. Irving Limited, it's a diversified forest products company. The company manages about 6 million acres of land across Maine, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. A lot of that's freehold land, and there's also some provincially owned land managed in New Brunswick by the company. In Maine, the J.D. Irving owns and manages 1.25 million acres of woodland up north, and the company manages all types of forests: hardwood, mixed wood, softwoods, and in the conifer type forest, it's sort of a hallmark of J.D. Irving Limited, their tree planting program that began in 1957 and has planted 1 billion trees to date. And we're planting at a rate of around 17 million or so a year, and about 3 million of that goes into our forests in Maine. As far as my responsibilities for quite a number of years, I managed the genetic resources for 6 conifer species in the seedlings that we produce and plant, and heavily involved in all the silviculture programs across the company, and as well as a lot of research and development, including some more ecological type work that the company's been engaged in.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm sort of curious that we all have sort of our own way where we've sort of come to the realization that something's up. So I'm curious to know sort of what made each of you first pay attention to climate change. Was that sort of a gradual growing awareness, or did all of a sudden you just have something just slipped, or something just sort of slapped you upside the head and said, wow. So I'm sort of curious, maybe I'll start with you, Bill, as to what made you start to think or wonder about climate change. When did that happen?
Well, I have to say that my first awareness really goes back to the famous Keeling curve, which I saw in my very first oceanography class as an undergraduate in college. That was a long time ago.
Holy cow.
And to be honest, I didn't really think much about it. At those days, everybody thought, well, the ocean is going to absorb all this and it's not going to be a problem. Then fast forward to perhaps the early 90s when some of the first climate assessment reports came out. And I started to, read about the climatic changes that were predicted for the northeastern part of the U.S. And then we start to see those happen. And I think a real watershed moment, no pun intended, was, well, actually pun was intended. It was in 2009, we had an extremely wet and warm winter. And there were 2 consequences of that. One was we realized that the seawater chemistry was really changing, and essentially based on information that was developed on the West Coast, we realized that ocean acidification was really occurring, and we saw severe impacts of that on our larval rearing. And the oysters go through a 2-week free swimming larval stage where they actually build a little larval shell, and it's a very sensitive life stage for them. We realized that it wasn't simply just carbon dioxide coming into the seawater from the atmosphere, but also it was linked to heavy runoff of fresh water, big runoff events where you had low pH, more acidic water coming into the upper reaches of the Damascata River. And ultimately, we solved that production problem by buffering all the water that we use in our larval cultures, which we do every time we do a water change in our larvae. It's essentially like putting Tums in the tank as an antacid. And then also at around that time, we started to notice that in the state of Maine, if there is a 2-inch rainfall that occurs within 24 hours, the state it closes down the shellfish harvesting areas in order to go out and make sure that the bacteriology is good and that the consumer safety is being protected. And so there's a moratorium on harvesting until they do that testing. And when that happens, we can't harvest or sell any product. And we started noticing that these became more frequent, and each time it was lasting sometimes up to a week or so. And we started really seeing the financial impact of that. And so that led us late down the road. But that was also something we started really thinking about. And we ultimately, and we'll probably get to this later when we talk about some of the things we've done to adapt, that was one of the things that we thought of a way around. And we did that. We built a new facility, and I can talk about that later. But that was really the first that I saw that. And then since then, we've certainly seen, we've had damage to infrastructure by heavy storms. The wind storms and storms that we see in the fall, these northeasters, they used to be maybe 30, 40 knot winds. Now they're 40, 50, up to 60 knot winds, and with more damage. All of these things add up.
Boy, that sounds like a real change and challenging environment. Jenni, I'm kind of curious as to for your farm in the dairy sector, what what made you all of a sudden say, this something's changing here? Was that a gradual growing awareness, or was that all of a sudden an epiphany?
I think, my own personal awareness predated me being on the farm here. I mean, Peter Gabriel, 1986, and Red Rain was like a big harbinger for me when it came to environmental concerns. And I brought that awareness when I came onto farm in 93. But I think when we had to work on longer stretches of keeping the cows cooler and more comfortable in the summer, instead of that stretch that we usually get, that we call that Maine hot summer, the dog days, that got earlier, that got longer. And I think now, and we've noticed it, we can grow a little bit longer day corn. We don't necessarily get the length of time to harvest it, but our growing degree days, the heat that's required and the sunshine required to germinate and raise our feed and our harvest crops has increased in intensity. But I think the thing that's really we've noticed the most is our winters. They can be arduous, they can be difficult, but at the end of our winters, we're not getting the results of what a true winter is for us with those cold swings. And that affects what cover crops, what winter kill we can expect. And it certainly affects the health of our soils and the pests that we have to deal with. We used to count on winter to be a pesticide, so to speak, and we can't anymore. And that has been a gradual change that we have noticed. And I think over the past 5 years, it has become an undeniable change for most dairy farmers and most people in agriculture here in Maine. What they attribute it to is another topic altogether.
I see. Greg, what's your perspective, particularly being sort of a little farther north than the rest of us?
Well, forestry is such a long-term endeavor that, certainly been, climate change has been on the radar for over 20 years. But I think what really sort of crystallized things for me was seeing talks by Dr. George Jacobson at the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine, showing through pollen studies and lake sediments how fairly dramatically the forest across the region has changed even in the last 3,000 years. And it really crystallized for me that the importance of building resilience into forest management. And that was really what sort of turned it into something that you thought about day to day in the actions that you do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting. I can see some parallels here that I hadn't really appreciated just from what you folks have been talking about. I'm kind of curious, if you might give us an example of one or two examples about how your company has taken steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's the adaptation piece, and then there's, of course, the mitigation piece. And why don't we start with you, Greg?
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of actions that we can point to, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. On the pulp and paper facilities, there's been, since 2005, the company's reported a 40-some% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions through a variety of actions to increase efficiency and utilize things like biomass and those sorts of things. So that's significant. Right in the state of Maine, there was a recent investment in installing a turbine at the Ashland sawmill, which uses green steam to produce energy. That's a good mitigation angle. And then a big thing is related to transportation. A lot of wood products have to move around the landscape to get to the various mills. And you can point to the reinvigoration and work that's been done on the Northern Maine Railway that to transport forest products from Northern Maine and New Brunswick down through to mills in more southern Maine and in New Brunswick as well. So that's another example. And things like the Ashland sawmill, a lot of the a lot of the byproducts of that mill are now going to the new pellet plant in Grand River in New Brunswick. So those are all good mitigation type examples. On adaptation, there's a number of things I'd point to related to building resilience. Starting from knowledge of the land and developing technology and information tools to help the foresters make better on-site decisions on what the management course will be. So that's a positive example. Another thing that we spend a lot of effort on is density management in our forests through pre-commercial, commercial thinning. All those things, help the trees deal with stress somewhat better. It also changes the profile of the products produced so that they're longer life cycle products that are coming out of the forests that we manage. I mentioned the tree planting previously, and that's an important tool in building resilience, and especially as the climate changes, and it gives you an opportunity to adjust the regeneration that's coming up in areas that have been harvested. We've had an ongoing genetics program for close to 40 years. And that's important because one of the key elements of that is understanding adaptive variation. And there are field tests established right across the Atlantic region that plant various genetic, out of the breeding program across quite a broad environmental gradient. In fact, the gradient that we test across is greater than what the projected change would be over the next 30, 40 years, say. So I think that's a key ingredient. And at the same time, we're also looking further afield. And recently there was an effort in New Brunswick and with J.D. Irving and the provincial government to obtain some selected material from Pennsylvania of eastern white pine that we're going to integrate right with the testing that we do for our own local sources. So those are a few things that we've done in the mitigation and adaptation world, I guess.
Yeah, so that sounds like some of the things actually conservation biologists have been talking about in terms of assisted migration and building, actually starting to build tomorrow's forest, the forest of tomorrow with respect to climate change today.
But very carefully.
Yes. Yeah, it's a long-term proposition that you don't want to mess up. Jenni, I'm kind of curious about what your company's done in terms of trying to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions.
So on our farm in particular, we've taken steps just to improve efficiency, whether it's the cows, the land, the water, the manure, the output, how we go about our business and how we go about raising and protecting our soils and waterways. And what we do on our farm may not be exactly what other dairy farms are doing, but they're all doing the same things. As an industry, as a whole, our dairy farms throughout the United States have reduced their carbon footprint and their emissions by 63% over the last 70 years. We're using far less water, producing less manure, and we're doing more with the manure. We're creating a more circular economy. But just the things such as conservation practices, energy audits to find ways that we can actually have better energy and better usage and utilization. Our cows, genetics of cows, Greg had mentioned genetics with regards to forestry. I mean, when it comes to our cows that are more feed efficient, meaning it takes less food for them, which means it will take less land for us to provide for them, and less inputs that may be man-made or natural, that all have a toll and cost on our environment. So we're able to produce more milk from fewer cows and have a far better reach regarding the goodness that we're producing and the goodness that we're returning. And one of the ways that we're doing that on our farm is partnering with Summit Natural Gas and utilities to create a methane digester that will utilize manure from our cows to find another use for that manure aside from just feeding the soil, but becoming more efficient at providing nutrients to our soil to grow the crops, but also providing natural gas and capturing that so that they can have that renewable energy source for Maine consumers. And local energy is just as important as local food.
Yeah, I think one of the shocking things I saw a couple of years ago was a report, a life cycle assessment that was done for the dairy industry. And I think of, let's just say in some sectors, there are other parts of the country that are better known for their efficiency in agriculture and crop production. And what was really striking was actually dairy farms in the Northeast had some of the lowest greenhouse gas emission profiles for every gallon of milk produced of anywhere else. And it had to do with just efficient growing of local feed. I mean, that was the biggest driver. I mean, all these other things are obviously important, but I was just really pleasantly surprised, and how that could be a great opportunity for the Northeastern dairy sector.
It is, and we need to invest in it, and we need to make sure that we have policies that back up that investment.
Thank you. So, Bill, I think I'm kind of curious what you or your sector's been able to do in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's probably a little harder for you folks, but surprise me.
Actually, I think there's some similarities that I think are interesting. So we are very much involved in genetics. In fact, having a hatchery really gives us an advantage. So that's really more of an adaptation angle, but sort of wanted to go back to what Greg had said, because we're sort of doing similar things. There's also for us, in terms of mitigation, using the water more, because we have to bring the water in and heat it. So we've installed over the years more efficient boilers to do that, and more efficient heat exchangers. And then also reusing the water more, being able to recondition it and not have it go back out so quickly. We in our new facility we built a few years ago, we put 282 solar panels on there. It provides about a third of our electrical energy for that building. We'd like to do more at some point. And then another thing that probably normally wouldn't be thought of as mitigation, but in fact it is, and that is using grow-out technology, some more modern grow-out technology. In the old days, we would grow our oysters during the summer on the surface in trays, and then when they got big enough, they basically get thrown on the bottom. And still, people do this. And then once they grow on the bottom unprotected, you go out and you drag them, which is a really energy inefficient and labor inefficient process. There was some technology actually developed in New Brunswick, Canada, probably now almost 2 decades ago. And we were an early adopter of that, starting in about 2010. And it uses cages that float at the surface of the water. You control biofouling by flipping them, but you're harvesting, we can harvest with our harvest boats 30,000 oysters in a half an hour and have them in mechanical refrigeration within an hour, hour and a half. So it's made a big difference. The fuel consumption dragging for oysters is really kind of problematic. When you have a plot of oysters that were planted on the bottom and you are dragging back and forth, it's not a very precise process. So you're always sort of wondering, looking at the cost benefit of the time it spends to get a certain number of oysters versus, going on to the next bed. But then of course you leave all these really, a lot of oysters down there that turn into huge, we used to call them gorillas, they'd be, 6-5-inch oysters that are tough to sell. So, a lot of, our company is really based on science and technology, and we've tried to grow more biomass in less space with less energy throughout the whole process. So that's very similar to what Jenny's saying.
Yeah, I think the little surprise here, I mean, I was aware of the genetics in terms of on the forest side, because I've talked with Greg before. Thank you, Jenny, for reminding me about how important genetics are in terms of tackling not just adaptation, but mitigation. But I really hadn't appreciated on the aquaculture end how that's important. And I think most of the time when we talk about genetics, the fear factor is, oh no, it's GMOs. And different people have different attitudes about GMOs. I know if on the commercial end, the fear is, can you get things to market? And I'm not sure all the listeners can appreciate it. This is sort of old-fashioned genetics. figuring out traits and then breeding to maintain or increase the prevalence of those traits in cows, oysters, trees.
We're actually in the process right now of, we're slated to start this in the spring, creating a new founding population of oysters where you take oysters from a variety of different sorts, just classic, basic selective breeding.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a big gene pool and then you select from that. And, you know, that's what we do.
Fascinating and encouraging.
I will add also, though, when it comes to genetically modified organisms and biotechnology, it does have a place in reducing our footprint and increasing our efficiency. There's a way to balance what we need and what we want and what is desirable. And we have to be able to take an objective approach to it and not just, you know, just throw it out with the bathwater. It's a really important topic because it does reduce our inputs and allow us to be even better at being stewards.
No, that's a good point, Jenni. That people have different values with respect to those issues, but some incredible efficiencies and reductions in impact have been found in the application of GMOs.
Just to add to that, you know, the critical importance of maintaining broad genetic diversity, particularly in response to changing conditions, that's always sort of a key factor in any genetic tree improvement program, and it's based on the natural variation that we have across the region, and so it's a critical aspect.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm sort of curious. You know, some people have described COVID-19 as the shakedown cruise for climate change. And we could spend the rest of our time talking about COVID-19, which is not what I want to do. But I'm curious to know what has COVID-19 taught you about managing for climate change? And I'm not expecting that there's a long litany of things, but managing for resiliency is not just for climate change, but for things like COVID-19 and recessions and other things. So I'm curious if there's one you could share with the audience, one or two nuggets of something that, you know, having hit with COVID-19 has actually helped you better prepare for the notion of climate change, or maybe not. Maybe it's just been a struggle to deal with COVID-19. I don't know, Greg. You're on up front, so I'll turn to you first.
Boy, that's a tough one, Andy. You know, I guess if dealing with COVID teaches one thing, it's the need to be flexible. I think that's and change things as you go, and not get locked into an approach that you can't deviate from. Mm-hmm. As far as the I guess that's about all I would say in terms of, you know, everybody's had to adapt to COVID. It's difficult to extrapolate that to how does that make you think about climate change, but apart from maintaining flexibility and resilience.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I don't know, Bill, if you've got anything to add to that.
I do. So first off, the one I like is that, you know, climate change is the final exam, and the pandemic is really sort of the pop quiz. And in our industry, you know, so what it really showed us is the importance of diversification. We have been for the last 2 decades only an oyster, you know, producer. Our hatchery only produces oyster seed, and we only grow oysters to market size. And when we first started the company, we actually in the hatchery grew a bunch of different types of bivalve seed, and we even grew some of those out all the way, and then decided to focus and become really good at oysters, which was a good decision. But now what this has done is said, look, you know, it is, you want to have a variety of different sources of revenue, different revenue streams. And so we're actively looking at other species, whether it be mussels, bay scallops, surf clams, or other types of clams to do in addition to oysters. We obviously won't do them all at once, but begin to work on some different species. And because what the lesson is from climate change is that conditions change, and some things benefit and some things don't. And so having multiple species gives you, the hope is that at least one of them will do well, and you can maintain revenue from that while you're solving another crisis.
Jenni, do you have things to add to this?
I do. I think the thing that COVID-19 and pandemic has done for our dairy farm and for a lot of other dairy farms is prove to them that, no, you cannot continue to do everything the same, that change is not the enemy, it is the salvation. And if you do not make change, you are not going to get where you want to be. And I think that has made it clear, and that ability to change, it makes you a little more fearless, makes you a little more, oh, we can do this too. And the reality is most of the changes that we need to adapt, change, and to appreciate and acknowledge and adapt to climate change and to mitigate the crisis are things that are going to benefit us. And we have to do it. It's, I like the shakedown cruise analogy. I've been calling it a Band-Aid puller, and it's a Band-Aid puller for a lot of things, including getting over that fear of change, which is something that it is very difficult to get over in farming, especially dairy farming. The average age of our Maine dairy farmers is right around 60. So they're of an age where change is not something they look forward to every day, and you can't blame them. But whether we're talking about genetics, whether we're talking about different techniques, new crops, new approaches that are all going to be necessary for us to deal with being more nimble, which is important, that flexibility to deal with the pandemic, but also able to react to the changes regarding climate. Those things actually involve everything we've learned and heritage, because there are genetics of heritage breeds that are going to be more suitable for tomorrow in dairy farming. And we now have the technology, we have to make that all meet. So I think that that's one of the things that it has done. It's made us really marry up our future goals, our present, and our knowledge from the past and history.
Yeah. No, fascinating. I mean, what I take away from this is the need to be flexible, the need to create diverse revenue streams, and to be fearless with change, which is, I think, all the more important actually in this moment of all time, with the polarization and the fear that we have on the left and the right, and this need that we need to be fearless about climate change and perhaps many other things.
I appreciate it.
If any of my employees are listening, there'll probably be some eye rolls to this, but I always say that problems are really the raw material for innovation, and I think that's the attitude that you have to have. Necessity is in fact the mother of invention.
I appreciated Bill's comments about product diversification, and that's certainly been J.D. Irving's approach over time. It's basically many products from the forest, and typically there's ups and downs in every product, but you hope they aren't all down at the same time.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go with one more question from me, and then we'll see what our audience has for questions. I'm actually going to go for the juggler a little bit here. If you had to share one, I'll back up for a minute. Making these changes is hard. We've all, you've all brought that forward. Despite the need to be fearless, change is hard. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you what kinds of external factors would make climate change action easier for you or for your sector. What kinds of resources do you need? And I'm looking, thinking of this is private and public. Climate change is all hands on deck, and it's going to take some real creativity, as you've all expressed and shown actually that what your companies are doing and will continue to do. So what kinds of resources do you feel like your sector is going to need to help make this change effectively and be more resilient?
Oh, I'll hop in right here, right now. I think an acknowledgement by those who are making policy and determining policy of the fact that agriculture, especially animal agriculture here in Maine, is a necessary part of the solution. We are already generating solutions and avenues. Even if you look at the city of South Portland, the city of Portland's climate report, they're acknowledging the fact that even though agriculture is not a part of their actual subset of population per se, except for it's how they're clothed and fed and sheltered, but it is how they deal with the waste and the energy they generate, and generate energy, period, by using ag-recycle energy and methane digesters to deal with both their food waste and generate their electricity needs. And I think that the more we realize that, and the interconnectivity of it all, we use wood products on our farms every day. And we're also finding that ways to mitigate in animal agriculture some of the enteric emissions of our cows can be found in aquaculture. We found that there are products that are raised and found naturally in the oceans that actually can help with those enteric emissions, and it's all connected. And when we're talking about all these different numbers and balancing our emissions and everything, we have to remember that the people doing the work need to be sustained, they need to be nourished, and need to be sustained and nourished well. And that means a good economy, that means good opportunity, accessibility, affordability, and availability of the things that they need. So if we're not raising the food and we're not providing them with good sources of protein, then how can we even begin to talk about renewing our energy sources and creating a better environment? We need good, strong people to be able to do that. And it's also very important that when we talk about the people, that we talk about all the people, those who are marginalized now through policy. We need to change the policies that allow them to stay marginalized.
Bill, how about you? What are things that would make it easier for your sector, your segment to transition?
I would focus on information. A lot of the oceanography and environmental monitoring tends to happen offshore, and most of where my industry operates is inshore. And I think there's a huge need for more monitoring of chemical oceanography, biological oceanography. In particular with ocean acidification, there needs to be a lot of carbonate chemistry monitoring coupled with larval recruitment monitoring, so that we understand what effects are actually happening. And that provides us with a heads up on what may be about to happen. I think a lot of people consider that one of the things that always frustrates me is that there have been a lot of granting programs and grant possibilities, but they all want like hard infrastructure. And to me, I consider this to be hard infrastructure. I view it just as a weather satellite kind of a thing. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, information is power, just as much as infrastructure is.
Yeah.
Greg,
So
do you have things to add?
Well, to add on to what Bill mentioned, levering technology and knowledge is really critical, and putting it in the hands of, in a way that's usable to forest managers. And some of the work with the Climate Smart Land Network that Manomet is leading is helpful to get that knowledge out there to all the landowners. So using technology, change detection, these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is dealing with climate change over time is going to really require a good focus on silviculture in the forest, and that costs money. So whether it's tending stands or planting trees or whatever it is, that's likely going to have a lot sharper focus in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, what I'm hearing is some of this is an R&D issue. Some of this is just we need to understand change as it occurs so we can more quickly adapt. And I'm hearing, we need to think about better integration. I'm not sure if people appreciated when Jenni was speaking, when talking about managing enteric emissions and how there are seaweeds that are grown elsewhere, even commercially, that have been found to be effective, even at low doses, feed additives that greatly reduce enteric emissions. I think, a piece of all of this on the mitigation end is, we used to like to joke about spam being everything but the oink, and having these natural systems that we manage to manage them more tightly so that they're more efficient. And when they're more efficient, then our emissions drop. And the hard part is also how to figure out how to make them more effective, which means delivering on all the things that we need. So, John, I think you're teeing up some questions for me, or should I just jump into what we've got so far?
I would say if you've got one on the screen, Andy, and can read it, go right ahead. And I've got a couple of more if we have time, but we've got about 8 minutes left. So go ahead if you can frame that up.
So here's one of our participants, somebody from the audience has posed. So hearing that really great back and forth on how we incentivize innovation all around. How do we really accomplish that in the marketplace? Specifically, how do we super kick off a serious innovation in the natural resource sector in Maine? And I don't know, I'm curious to see what, maybe Bill, if you have some thoughts about that.
Well, I'm actually co-chair of an outfit called Sea Maine, which stands for Seafood. I'm trying to remember what it's a Seafood Economic Accelerator for Maine. It's parallel to the For Maine project that the Economic Development Administration funded, and we're doing that in the marine sector. And I see that as a way to really kick off a bunch of innovation. We're just getting started. We have subcommittees and different, marketing and trying to understand the information that's available. And then there's also an innovation and emerging technologies subcommittee. And I think there's a lot of potential with that.
And just give us an idea of the flavor of who's participating in that.
The idea is that it's industry driven, but it's so there are a number of different, across the marine industry sectors. There are representatives, but then also the University of Maine, Focus Maine. I know I'm going to leave out a bunch, but there's a whole bunch of nonprofits that are involved. The Island Institute is managing the project. So there's participation and input from all kinds of institutions throughout Maine. And I think, that's probably true. Are you familiar, Greg, with the For Maine effort? There's been a lot of innovation, I think, that's come out of that, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. It's been a big endeavor. And, the thing I would add is that it's never easy. If you're going to make progress, it doesn't happen on its own, and you have to have really good collaboration between academia, between the government agencies, with their science folks, and the users, and real good communication to turn the knowledge into something that makes a difference on the ground.
Yeah, I hate to use the word, what you're talking about in my mind is, I used to have my eyes roll in the back of my head when I would say this, but good governance. And I don't mean governance in terms of regulations. I mean in terms of how do you guide and support innovation.
Yeah.
How about Jenni? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I think incentivizing and prioritizing policies. When we look at the big umbrella policies that are already governing here in agriculture, look at that farm bill, that huge monstrosity that we deal with, and prioritize and acknowledge that there is a climate crisis and work to circumvent it through the tools that we have. Yes, we can build new programs, we can build new policies, we can build new integration and think tanks to handle this. But if we're not going to deal with the big elephant in the room that is say the Farm Bill, and make the changes and tweaks to it that we need to make it less of a one size fits all and more of a targeted application. Some of the proposed legislation from some of Maine's congressional delegation has sought to do just that, and to prioritize regionality, especially when it comes to New England and Maine. Our region can be sufficient and mostly self-sufficient. For dairy in particular, if we were to focus on making sure that we had enough processing here in state, and that processing was using products that, or using packaging and using methodology that was friendly to the environment and work to lower emissions and to leave less of a footprint, but also to work within other sections of the economy in a circular way, so that it's benefiting all, including the earth. So policies and incentives that are going to prioritize that is, I think, are key. And a lot of that is jumping over the hurdle and saying, oh yeah, we have to do it. We have to do it.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is really a diversity of things, but primarily these cross-cutting partnerships as being a really important piece, not just across the traditional silos of government, private industry, and nonprofit world, but also across sectors. And what I'm hearing today is there's these commonalities where I think there's both opportunities to learn from each other, including thinking about innovation, but actually opportunities to work together in new ways. But it sounds like policy is going to be a really important piece, both state and federal policy to align to addressing these issues and supporting our natural resource economy and making this huge transition in a period of great change. So we got to wrap up, but what I would like to say, if you could just answer, if you have appreciate if each one of you could share just one piece of advice for the audience today from a business perspective of managing climate change. What's your small, short piece of advice?
I'll go first.
Thanks. Sure, please.
We can adapt, all we want, but we have cause of the problem, and that means that there has to be a national U.S. policy about climate action, and because without that, I think that we need to be the ones to resume a leadership role globally, and whether we shouldn't be talking politics, I know, but the reality is that if we don't do that, this problem is not going to be solved at all.
Yes, Andy, if I could say one thing, I mean, I take Bill's points that, actions have to be supported by policy, but for an individual player, whether it's an industry or individuals, make sure that you're thinking about your day-to-day actions and asking yourself, am I building resilience and flexibility? And that's going to go a long way to help deal with the challenge over time.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like good business.
I think that really, honestly, the best way to do it is to look at it as a business. It's about your bottom line. You can get, don't get hung up on who it's coming from or where you think it's coming from, the language, and taking offense. Think about your bottom line in your business. If you want to do something good, you need to do something good. That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter if it's coming from somebody that you don't necessarily appreciate or a partisan politic that you don't appreciate. Your bottom line is important. And if everything tells you that change is necessary, change is probably going to be good. You might as well make it your own change.
I think that's good advice for all of us, to make it your own change. Well, I want to thank you all three of you today in our audience. I thought I knew a lot, and I learned a lot of new things to tell me that I still have a lot to learn on this subject from each one of you. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences and wealth of knowledge. and like I said, I'm certainly better informed, and I hope our audience has a deeper appreciation for what the natural resource sector is doing in Maine and across the region to become more resilient and then manage climate change. Thank you all.
Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
You ready to
Okay.
step in as moderator, John, if we need you?
Of course, of course. I usually am up to plan D if I have to be. So indeed, I can do this. Maybe Katie, while you're working on Cathy, I'll just go ahead and get started with introductions of who we've got, and we'll start with Lydia Covert, who's I don't know where she is on your screen. At the top of mine is the corporate sustainability manager at Unum, where she drives strategies for long-term environmental, social, and governance issues. ESG is the lingo we like to use, we professionals. She's led a cross-disciplinary team in completing the first so-called materiality assessment of the company, and maybe she can tell us more about what that is just this past year. And then we've got Megan Hellstedt, who is, I've known for a while, is at Hannaford. She's also vice president of the sustainable retailing at Ahold Delhaize, the parent company of Hannaford. We all know Hannaford. We don't know Ahold Delhaize as well, Megan. And over the last 15 years, Megan's helped the global retailer, the parent company, establish itself as a leader in the industry by prioritizing people, planet, and the business as a part of their healthy and sustainable strategy. The world's leading food retailer brand, I didn't know that, has taken an ambitious step to inspire customers to make smarter, healthier, more climate-friendly choices. So we'll hear more about what Megan has been doing. Then Ethan, let's see, I've lost Ethan's bio. Hang on, everybody, and well, maybe I'll just speak from memory on Ethan, Director of Marketing at Sugarloaf USA, and obviously the ski industry has to think a lot about climate change, and Sugarloaf USA is. Ethan's especially glad to have him here today because he has a very outward-facing as a Director of Marketing with the public, so he has a really keen sense of what his customers and clients are thinking about climate as well. So, Katie, just to check in, how's Cathy doing out there in the Zoom universe? Any sign of her yet?
Yep, Cathy is still trying to log in. She's having some technical troubles that kind of came out of nowhere. So
that's to be expected.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, you can go ahead and start, John, and then Cathy will pop in whenever her Zoom lets her in.
Indeed, and also you're working on John, I presume, after you get Cathy. So let's get going, and maybe this is really informal conversation, and maybe just start by each of you telling me a little bit about what your company does, because we may not know or fully understand, and what you do at your company. So let's start with Megan. Megan.
Sure, John. Thanks, and thanks for having us today. I'm excited for the panel discussion.
Megan, Katie.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good. You're good.
Okay, great, good. So Ahold Delhaize, you already gave a good explanation of the parent company for Hannaford. That's the entity that I work for. I have some great colleagues working at Hannaford as well here on the ground. But Ahold Delhaize is an international food retailer with about 7,000 stores globally in the US and Europe, serving more than 54 million customers a week. So we sell a lot of groceries to a lot of people in a lot of markets. And the work I do with them is leading the health and sustainability strategy. So helping the global company set a path forward that applies in all of our markets as much as at Hannaford as our brands in Europe. And there are other brands in the US. So my work is to lead a health and sustainability strategy that helps prepare the company for the future and helps prepare the company for changing consumer expectations on health and sustainability and the changing environment around us. So adapting to climate change is very much part of that.
Megan, to be clear, you, at least before COVID, you must have traveled a lot because there are chains all around the world in the parent company.
Yep.
So even though we know you as Hannaford, you see a lot globally within the food sector.
Precisely, yeah.
So a lot of cross-fertilization of what Hannaford's learning with other grocery companies.
And that's a lot of what we do is leverage the size of the company by taking great examples that are happening at Hannaford or at Stop and Shop or at Giant Food or at Albert Heijn in the Netherlands, sharing those so that we can move faster, particularly on health and sustainability. There's a bit of urgency and speed needed. So that's what we try to do.
Being from Maine, we do like to think of Hannaford as leading the rest of the company. So
of course, absolutely.
Don't mind if we have that bias.
No, not at all. Don't mind at all.
Okay. Ethan, what's your title? And I said it already, but what do you do? And what does Sugarloaf USA do?
Yeah, well, thank you for having us as part of the panel as well. Really excited to be here. My title is Director of Marketing for Sugarloaf. Probably a lot of people on this are familiar with Sugarloaf. We are a ski resort. We're also the second largest mountain in the state of Maine, behind Mount Katahdin. Sugarloaf is part of the Boyne Resorts family of resorts. They're one of the largest operators of ski resorts and golf resorts in the country, based out of Michigan. My job in particular is in charge of all the marketing for Sugarloaf, but also communications, public relations. So, relaying our messaging and our efforts to our guests and making sure that they're well informed of everything that we're doing, but also listening to what they have to say, gathering their feedback and their thoughts. And, obviously sustainability is a big part of that.
Thank you, Ethan. Lydia?
Yeah, so I'm the Corporate Sustainability Manager for Unum Group, which provides life, accident, disability, as well as some dental and vision insurance, as well as leave management software. And it's a company based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but I think as most people know, a very large group of employees in Portland, as well as employees in Louisiana, Colombia, and the UK, and Poland and Ireland as well. My role there is to develop our long-term and short-term strategies for, as you mentioned, John, our environmental, social, and governance issues approach. And in particular, my work is to really embed this across the company to ensure that I'm not a solo team working on this alone, but that it's part of everyone's job within Unum's group's objectives.
Thank you, Lydia, and welcome, John. Good to have you here. John Fitzpatrick with the Jackson Laboratory. Instead of me reading an intro of you, just tell us who you are, what you do, and what the Jackson Lab does.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I apologize for being late. Despite having facilities responsibilities for about 1,600,000 square feet of research laboratory space, I cannot fill out a calendar correctly. So sorry I'm late. I am John Fitzpatrick, Senior Director of Facilities at the Jackson Laboratory. The Jackson Laboratory is a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Bar Harbor, Maine. We've been around for 91 years, and our focus is to perform research, both in genetics and genomics, to try to find cures to a variety of human diseases, but also to distribute the world's highest quality, most genetically stable research mice for research programs all around the world. We distribute about 3.5 million mice a year to 22,000 researchers in 70 countries around the world. My role, I oversee the overall facilities organization, maintenance, utility plant, utility procurement, new construction and expansion. We currently have sites, as I mentioned, based in Bar Harbor. We expanded in Sacramento, California about 11 years ago. We opened up a brand new 185,000 square foot genomics facility in Farmington, Connecticut in 2014. Ellsworth, new production facility in 2018. And we're currently opening up a new mouse production facility in Beijing, China.
Thank you. So I've got a series of questions. Some are relevant to all of you, and some are maybe I'll direct to particular individuals. But this next one, and maybe John will just keep going with you. When and why did climate change sort of come onto your radar? And it could have been 20 years ago or last month. It doesn't matter. But it's obviously on your radar. You're all very active in dealing with it in one way or another. John, how did Jackson Lab start to come to deal with this?
Yep. Well, I think climate change really has come on our radar only in the past few years. With that being said, I've been with Jackson 32 years now, and one of my early roles here was energy management, energy conservation, and whether it's heat recovery, whether it's improved lighting, whether it's replacing old inefficient chillers with new ones, taking advantage of efficiency Maine programs or others. We've always been looking at our base energy density and trying to get it as low as we can. Maine has been a little bit behind the curve. I'm just going to come out and say it in developing being able to construct and design LEED acceptable buildings. We've always said that we create buildings that are certifiable but not certified. Because we're in the northeast corner of the country and it's just not pragmatic to do that. So we're, efficient buildings, efficient energy use has been on our radar, at least mine, for 30 years. Climate change has really come to the front with us as we've expanded outside of simply Bar Harbor. Our Sacramento facility, for the last 4 weeks, I've been on the phone almost daily with our team out there dealing with the forest fires that have been as close as 25 miles away from our site, but having a huge impact from a smoke standpoint. We ventilate our buildings 100% outside air. The other climate issue in Sacramento that we've been dealing with for about a week straight, they were 15 degrees above our design criteria for the building. They're running 113, 115, 116 degrees. Our facility in Farmington has been on the receiving end of a couple of hurricanes coming up the East Coast that have been much stronger in recent years than certainly has been practical. But also, even in our main facilities, we're dealing with temperatures that are warmer in the summer, fortunately warmer in the winter. But our infrastructure is sized for what is traditionally a Maine cooling season, not days in the high 90s, low 100s. So it's going to have a significant economic impact for us to upgrade our systems. And then finally, as we've been scouting facilities in China, and I don't know how many have had the opportunity to spend much time in China, the air quality, the air pollution, and the general environment that our new facility in has really given me pause that things need, if things are that bad there, they can quickly erode in the States if we don't do something quickly to that same level.
Thank you, John. Cathy, hey, good to see you.
Yes, thank you. I apologize to all of you. I had some difficulties here with technology here in London, but we've solved them thanks to the genius of my assistant here.
Yeah, indeed. Cathy, I think I'm going to let me fill you in on where we are, and I'm going to skip the introduction of you just for the sake of time, except
Fine.
A lot of us know Cathy around the state of Maine. She's our fearless founder of the Maine Climate Table back in 2013. So we're happy to have you here. with the panel. So we were just on sort of the second question of why and how did climate change come onto the radar of our panelists companies here. John just answered, and I think we'll just keep going with maybe with Megan, then Ethan, then Lydia, and I'll turn it over to you, Cathy, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Go right ahead.
All
I have
right.
a whole list of questions I'm anxious to ask all of you.
All right, have at it. Megan, you're up next.
Great, thanks, John. So the when and why of climate change, I think we first started measuring climate emissions was about a decade ago. So it's been on the radar for 10, 15 years for Ahold Delhaize as a company. Knowing that our own, I mean, a lot of it started with the kinds of things John was talking about, that reducing climate emissions often saves money for the business, being more efficient in energy, using better refrigerants, having more efficient transportation, that all saves money for the business and it's good for the climate. So that's been kind of where things were for about a decade with the company. But then the last couple of years, things have stepped up. And so we've heard more and more from investors who say, nice that you're reducing your emissions, but are you reducing them enough? Are you in line with the climate science? Are you in line with the Paris Accord? And are you looking forward? Are you strategically managing the risks of your company that are coming from climate? So in 2020, we took a couple of steps up, and one of those steps was to set a new set of long-term climate targets that are science-based, so they align with the science coming out of the IPCC. And those are targets for 2030 to reduce our own emissions by another 50%, building on what we've been doing over the last years. But the really new thing about it is a new commitment to reduce emissions along our whole value chain. So we did some analysis with our company, and from our operations as a retailer, our stores, our warehouses, our transport, the emissions from those operations are about 5% of our total impact as a company. And these are all rough estimates. The science isn't exact yet, but we know enough to know that 95% of our impact comes primarily from the products we sell and the embedded emissions in the products that we sell. So our new targets now take that into the scope of what we want to reduce by 2030. Not only our own sort of directly controllable emissions, but also those that are embedded in the products. So that was one big step up. And the second step we took in 2020 was to adopt the guidelines from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, which sets out some really useful guidelines in analyzing the risks that a company has related to climate change, and also the opportunities at the same time. The risks we'll face going forward as a food company, where food is really being impacted by climate change and will continue to be impacted going forward. And so those are two things we've changed recently. We're really feeling an increased pressure from our investor base and also, frankly, from consumers to be more active on climate change.
Lydia.
Yeah, so I'm gonna really, Megan said a lot of what applies to Unum Group as well. We started working from a cost efficiency and savings perspective in terms of our buildings and looking really at the environmental impacts of our buildings quite a few years ago. And in the past few years, that's really ramped up to look at our whole value chain. Of course, for an insurance company, that looks dramatically different than it looks for a food retail company. But where we see our emissions mostly centered is around our investment portfolio. So we're maybe a few years behind Ahold Delhaize, but along the same path where we're beginning to look at what all of the scope of our emissions are and how we can reduce these. You might have seen this morning, actually, the Science Based Target Initiative, which helps companies align their targets with what we need to do as a world in order to meet our climate goals, has recently released guidance for financial institutions, which is key in helping us as an insurance company understand how we need to reduce our investment portfolio emissions and how we can do this in a way that is sustainable in the long term.
Thank you. Ethan.
You know, for us, a lot of similarities to what you just heard from Megan and Lydia. I think, though, in terms of how long it's been on our radar, you know, as a weather-dependent largely weather dependent business. I think it's been on our radar for probably longer than some other companies. The core of our business is skiing and snowboarding, and that relies on, if not natural snowfall, then at the very least temperatures that are cold enough for us to make snow to ski on. So the changing climate and how it's affecting snowfall and temperatures has been on our radar for a long time. I would say in recent years, just like the others have said here, it's become there's been more of a focus on it. It's become probably more urgent, and that's sort of culminated in a goal for us and for all of Boyne Resorts to be carbon neutral by 2030. And the recent steps there have included a lot of things that you just heard as well. Inventorying our carbon emissions and finding out where they're coming from, and what are the steps that we can take to make the biggest impact on those in the shortest amount of time.
All right, thank you. I want to pick up on something you said, Megan. You mentioned your customer base. I'm curious if you could tell us something about what your customer base is saying and how you're responding to it.
Yeah, it's a really good
I'm
question,
sorry,
Cathy.
Megan, sorry, sorry to interrupt. I just want to remind everybody in the audience that you can use your Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to send any questions for any of the panelists our way. Sorry, Megan, go right ahead.
No, that's great. It's the consumer input has changed a lot. And I think so from our perspective at Ahold Delhaize internationally, it's a little bit different in each market. And there are stereotypes that maybe the Europeans are a little bit further ahead than the American consumers. But across our markets, we're hearing a lot more from consumers saying, well, what are you doing about climate change? And we also, it's from consumers, it's from potential employees as well. It's really showing up as an important reason for people to work for us as a company, is if we have a strong stance on climate change and sustainability. And I think, what we've seen is a sort of a gradual tick up in consumer interest in sustainability and more curiosity about how the products tie to climate change or sustainability. We've also seen a tick up in the last couple of months. And so with COVID, some of the consumer research that's coming back is actually showing that interest in healthier and more sustainable lifestyles has accelerated even more with this sort of global pandemic threat in front of everybody. And so I see, you can never predict the trends for the future, but I think consumers are starting to connect the dots. How is this impacting me and my family? What can I do differently? And how, from our perspective as a retailer, how can retailers help consumers make better choices? So there is definitely an increasing awareness.
Yeah, thank you. Ethan, let me turn to you on this subject and ask about Sugarloaf. You're in the ski business, obviously, but you're also in the restaurant business, the hotel business, you're a retailer. Do you think your customers care about the issue of climate change or expect any particular kind of action?
Yeah, I do. I know they do, because we hear about it frequently. And, like I was saying before, in recent years, the importance of that issue has grown both from our guests who are traveling here and doing business with us, but also, like Megan was saying, from our workforce. It's more and more important when people are deciding where they're going to work and spend their time and put all their energy. It's more important to them now than seemingly ever that the company's values align with their own, and a large part of that is sustainability. Like you said, we're a diverse company that, the core of what we do is skiing and snowboarding, but we're also operating hotels and lodging and restaurants and retail stores and, golf course, you name it. So there's a lot of challenges that come with that. But it's clear that across the portfolio of all the businesses that one of the most important things for our guests and our staff in recent years has been, where we stand on sustainability.
Good, thank you. John, you're in the genetics research business. Jackson Labs is. How about at Jackson Labs? Do customers or employees talk about climate change, express concerns, or expect any particular action from you?
Right. So not so much as Ethan, Lydia, and Megan. We're again, our customer base are research organizations or pharmaceutical companies around the world. Where the rubber really hits the road is our employees, and things have changed. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to improve the health span of people, and most of our employees are very mission oriented. That's why they're here, and we are getting a groundswell and a ground root support at all of our sites where we've created grassroots green teams who are self-empowered to come up with ideas regarding recycling, solar power, supply chain improvements, thermal envelope changes, energy updates, etc. Most of our new employees, when we're recruiting them and interviewing them, I would say the vast majority do have a question about, what's our position on climate change? What do we do for energy conservation? What awards have we won for doing these types of things? And we can rattle half a dozen off. So it's really driven by employees from within, as opposed to our customers, which are a little more nebulous than the rest of my co-presenters here today.
Very interesting. I mean, it's so interesting how people have become so much more aware in recent times. Lydia, I know that Megan mentioned investors and the impact of investors. Are you also hearing from your investors?
Every day.
And if so, what?
So we're hearing a lot from our investment community. That's probably the most active stakeholder, I would say, right now, and a close second, followed by our employees, as everyone else has mentioned. And that community, especially within the past few months, after seeing the impacts of COVID, has really ramped up the focus on how companies are responding to climate change, and not just our own response to climate change, but how we think climate change will impact our business, and how we are making sure that we have the least amount of impact as possible, or that we're at least ready to go with other business models in cases of dramatic impact. Megan mentioned the Task Force for Financial Disclosures, TCFD. That's a huge investor pressure right now. They're all asking us to complete that across multiple platforms. And other pressures include, from the investment community, include letters to CEOs asking them to make changes, otherwise they'll be voting in the next round of votes against directors on our board. So, and that's not particular to Unum, it's letters that are coming up from investors, and a lot of these large investors across the board, such as State Street and Vanguard and BlackRock.
Interesting. Megan, let me start with you, but I want to invite the rest of the panel to jump in if you have anything you want to offer on the question. What about supply chains? Do you know what your suppliers are doing? Does it matter what they're doing? What can you do if you're even concerned to try to affect their behavior?
Yeah, so yes, it matters. And no, we don't really know what they're doing yet. I think we're just at the beginning of this journey. And I was pleased to hear, I caught some of the earlier panel where Jenni, one of the panelists, was talking about what they're doing on their dairy farms. There is, the same things we're talking about here today are happening in the agricultural supply space, in the food product manufacturer space. And so there, more and more of our suppliers are setting climate targets, doing their climate risk analysis. And to be honest, we're just starting those conversations with them to understand what they're doing, how we can help, how we can partner together, because we know that our climate emissions from food in general, from the whole food chain globally, needs to come down as a big part of meeting the sort of global climate emission reduction needs. And so we're at the start of the journey. Some of the farmers are doing great stuff. Like Jenni had mentioned earlier, there are things that protein farmers or animal, whether it's dairy or meat-based farmers, are starting to change the way they feed the animals, the way they grow the animals to reduce emissions, and that's really positive change. And you also see a greater diversity of products coming up. What might diets look like in 10 or 20 or 30 years, diets that are more friendly to the climate. They may have more plant-based proteins in them, and they may have new grains or revived heirloom products that we've lost to diversify diets and make them more climate friendly. So there's a lot to do, but it's underway.
Yeah. John, in your business, supply chains matter?
Of course they do. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say we haven't got down that far yet. We do a lot of vendor inspections, quality inspections to make sure they're up to our standards. We have not added an additional sheet yet that has us go through their sustainability profile. We're focusing right now more on the tier 1, tier 2 activities, travel, energy procurement, what we use on site. I will say we created a position dedicated, sustainability program management position in March. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks after the position was approved, the world changed and all of our hiring was frozen. Looking forward to that getting pushed back at the top of the pile in January when we start our new fiscal year. And once we get our house in order on those areas, then we'll get down into tier 3 and tier 4 activities, which will involve both our supply chain coming in, but our transport and logistics chain going back out.
Okay. And what was the idea behind this new position you created?
I think it's attributable to the importance of sustainability to JAX now as an entity.
Okay.
It can't be a side job for us anymore.
Right. Ethan, back to you on the question of supply chains. Does that affect you?
Certainly, it affects us. Like I said, we have a diverse collection of businesses that we operate as a resort, and things for restaurants, for example, where we're sourcing food and how that food is being transported to the resort, all makes a big difference. Like some of the others, that's a little bit further down the road from where we are yet, getting to those tier 3 impacts. Our initial focus in the last couple of years has been the tier 1 and tier 2. What can we control ourselves, and again the tier 2 impacts, but the tier 3 we obviously have to get to, and addressing food, retail items, the components that we use in our snow guns on the hill. How are all of these being sourced, and how are they being transported to the resort, and everything? It all factors into our impact as a business.
Yeah. For any of our listeners who may not be familiar with that terminology, could you just explain what tier 1 and tier 2 are?
Sure. Some of the others might be able to do a little bit better with some of their expertise, but tier 1 basically is our direct impact, our emissions, things like emissions from our buses, our snowcats, our electricity use. Tier 2 would apply to things like our guests traveling here to the resort and the emissions that they put out in that process. And then tier 3 would be getting into, like we were just talking about, supply chain, the impacts of how our products are made or how our food is sourced.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for tier 2, I'm curious, how people travel to your resort, or in your case, Megan, how people travel to the supermarket. How can you affect that? What can you do to try to have an impact that would result in fewer emissions?
think
Anybody,
Yeah,
jump in.
Yeah, I'm not sure you
go
want
ahead,
to-
Ethan.
For us, it's obviously a big challenge. You know, we're a destination resort and we're located in a pretty remote area of the state. And in general, people have to drive a minimum of an hour to 2 hours to get here. In a lot of cases, even further than that. And that's a big challenge for us and how we can address that. There have been initiatives throughout the ski industry to encourage more carpooling, encourage use of electrical vehicles, like providing preferred parking, which is a big issue at a ski resort, how close you can park vehicles. Preferred parking for electric or low emissions vehicles. But it's a big challenge, and it's not one that's easy to address because there's not, sufficient public transportation where we could have a large number of our guests take advantage of that to travel here.
Yeah. John, anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I will. And Ethan summed it up in a nutshell. There's not enough public transportation in the state of Maine to really have an effect on anything. So we recognize that probably 15, 18 years ago and created public transportation. We partnered with Down East Transportation. Most of you probably know it as the folks that run the Island Explorer. And created our own commuter bus system to bring employees to JAX. During pre-COVID periods, we have 8 destination buses, 2 from Bangor, 1 from Millbridge, 2 from Ellsworth, and another one from Franklin. We brought in round trip about 160 people a day. Average round trip 80 miles a day times 160 people. It starts adding up. It's millions of gallons of gas every year that are saved, tens of thousands of tons of carbon that are saved, and we would expand that program even further if we were able to come up with the capital to be able to buy the buses, which are not inexpensive. We've done very well getting our share of federal funds that pass through the Maine Department of Transportation. But we would love to do more. Certainly the numbers have gone down during this COVID period. Number one is we've had more employees work from home, but 2 employees are fearful of getting on public transportation at this point in time. We certainly look forward for a variety of reasons for today's present condition to go by the wayside. One of which is to get those numbers back up, 130, 140, 150 riders. So that's one of the things that we can do. We're very proud of it. It's probably the 3rd largest public transportation network in the state.
It's fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned the Maine Department of Transportation offering some kind of financial support. How did you even find out about that?
I give our government relations folks all the credit in the world. This is not a political pitch by any means, but Susan Collins sits on the Federal Transportation Department Council and has been pretty beneficial to Maine State Department of Transportation. So we look at grants.gov very regularly for transportation grants and awards, energy recovery grants and awards, in addition to obviously the scientific grants and awards that we're looking out for. So we usually spot most of them there, but we do get a press release from either Angus King or Susan Collins when these funds are about to be made available.
Good. Anybody else want to jump in on this question? If not, I'll move to something else. All right, let me ask Megan. COVID-19 is affecting everyone, but some people more than others. People of color, immigrants, people who are poor. We've all seen how COVID has laid these disparities that exist in society bare, and including in Maine. And I'm curious whether COVID and this reality about COVID has affected your company's practices, and if you see any connection between that and climate change.
Yeah, so Cathy, I absolutely see a connection between that and climate change, because we're seeing the same story play out from climate change, that lower income or minority communities are more impacted by climate change, whether it's globally at the country level or within the United States, looking at which citizens are most at risk from the changes from climate. And lower income communities are more at risk. It's clear. The higher income communities are finding ways to work through it and adapt, but that's not equally applied. So I think if we take this experience with COVID as a little bit of an example of what have we learned from this that we can then learn as we face increasing climate change, there's a lot we can take away from it. So for example, one of the issues with COVID, just very practically during the last couple of months, that Hannaford was facing in Maine and the other states is empty shelves, sort of everything being bought off the shelves. And at the same time, and traditionally things that aren't sold would be funneled through the food banks, and then they would go to communities in need. But there was nothing to go to the food banks because everything was being sold off of the shelves. And so what some teams at Hannaford did, which was very creative, was they had their partners at the food bank saying, listen, we have a growing community of people in need at this moment, and we have a shrinking supply of food to give to them. And so they were able to connect some of their farmers that supply Hannaford directly with the food banks. So they said, okay, farmers, please keep supplying us. We appreciate that. That's great. We know you have excess on your farms because restaurants are closed, food service isn't running. So you have stuff you can't redirect to the normal channels. So we're going to connect you with the food banks so that food can go directly to communities in need. So that is just one example, but of applying creativity, making things a bit more flexible, creating new partnerships that didn't exist before, to help equalize a bit the situation of people during time of crisis.
Fantastic. Great initiative on the part of your employees.
Yeah, they did
Lydia,
a great job.
Yeah, let me turn to you with a related question. Last week, one of our presenters, Professor Charlie Colgan, said that climate change is like COVID-19 in that it presents systemic risks, and risks that clearly haven't been adequately addressed by national political leaders. In the previous session, just before ours, we heard the panelists making the connections as well and saying they felt that they had learned that you need to be flexible, you need to diversify, you need to be willing to change. Let me ask you, clearly, businesses of all sizes and types, not just big ones like yours, are actively taking action on climate. Do you see any lessons that have been learned from COVID that affect climate, or what your company will do, or how it sees the challenge of climate?
Absolutely. And I agree completely that this is highlighting the systemic risk that's involved in all sorts of businesses. And I think as an insurance company, we're very accustomed to looking at risk every single day, but for many other companies, it's not a common discussion. So my advice would be, and I'm keeping this very broad, but don't underestimate it. So don't underestimate either the issue at hand, and also don't underestimate our ability to adapt quickly when we need to. I mean, our company saw in the span of over a weekend where we went from work as normal to the next morning, and on Monday morning, we didn't come in. And the ability of a company to deploy resources quickly to employees so that they could work at home, that was something we didn't think we could achieve. And yeah, we did. And I think that lesson could apply easily to climate change as well, is that we shouldn't be intimidated by the problem, but we also shouldn't underestimate it.
Yeah, good. Lydia, I'm going to follow up with another question to you, and then I'm going to ask others to jump in on the same. Unum has offices in Maine, in South Carolina, Massachusetts, California, the UK, Ireland. Some, but not all of these places have established aggressive climate goals similar to Maine, which includes, for Maine, climate neutrality by 2045. In your experience, even if those climate goals don't require your company to take specific actions, do they affect your company if you're operating in a jurisdiction where there is aggressive goals on climate for the state?
Absolutely. For example, within the state of Maine, I've had more vendors approach me for solar installations, for battery installations, et cetera, within our Maine headquarters than I have for any other location. And in fact, we're taking some of these offers up and we're continuing to explore the other ones. For instance, we're currently in the process of installing level 2 chargers within our parking garages. And that's in partnership with Efficiency Maine and Revision Energy. And cases like this, the vendor approaching us and saying, hey, you have a really good opportunity to save is really beneficial. And that stems directly from the incentives that Maine provides within this area.
Let me go to you, John, and ask a similar question. Does the fact that Maine has these aggressive climate goals affect Jackson Labs and the actions it takes?
I think it benefits us. I don't think it's driven us to the point yet where we're feeling we need to take aggressive action right now to meet them. We're very opportunistic. Much like Lydia said, we partner with Efficiency Maine on a variety of rebates and incentives, whether it's changing from, again, a 20-year-old chiller to a new mag-bearing chiller, whether it's participating in the new solar programs that have been out and incentivized since January of this year. We've executed agreements to purchase 15 million kilowatt hours worth of power off the solar grid based on the new incentive programs that are available. What I hope happens, and I agree 100% with Lydia earlier, it was amazing how responsive we were to COVID. I hope we don't get to the point where we need to be as responsive again out of necessity. Hopefully we can make a nice, easy glide transition to make the changes that are required, as opposed to Friday you're in the office, Monday you're working from home.
Yeah.
We want to be
absolutely
driven by climate change and have such a drastic cliff appear out of nowhere.
Yeah. Ethan, any comment on this question? Does it affect Sugarloaf that Maine has these aggressive goals?
I would say yes. I speak for Sugarloaf, and I can't necessarily speak for our other resorts within our company that are located in other states where requirements might be different. But similar to what John said, the goals for Maine have created all of these various programs that we're able to take advantage of. Things like Efficiency Maine, where we're able to partner with Efficiency Maine to do things like upgrade hundreds of our snow gun nozzles so that we can produce snow more efficiency with less electricity needed for compressed air, upgrade light fixtures throughout the resort so that we're drawing less electricity for that. And these are programs that don't necessarily exist for some of our sister resorts in other states. And that's largely due to, these ambitious goals that we have for the state, that these programs are available to us.
Yeah, good. I'm going to quickly turn us to some questions that have come in from the audience. And I invite anyone who would like to take the challenge to answer them. First, how might we induce our Maine legislature to engage more money to support more clean energy innovation? Essentially, how might the folks we've engaged go to the Maine legislature to show how to involve more companies in what they're doing? Good on the current companies, but how do we reach the rest of the people out there who may not be as far along as you? John, want to take a stab?
Yeah, I'll take a stab. I mean, the way you sell any program is to lay out the issue and show the benefit of doing it, or the detraction for not doing it. It always boils down to money. Sooner or later, we've taken advantage of Efficiency Maine programs. We've taken advantage of the distributed energy net metering program. We've taken advantage of other programs and SREC incentives in Connecticut or California. The fact of the matter is that money comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's either being subsidized by the ratepayers, it's being subsidized by a carbon tax, it's being subsidized somewhere. But not everybody's going to be in a position to be able to take advantage of that, unfortunately. The large energy consumers, whether it's a paper mill, a laboratory, a large office, 500,000 square feet office space, that's where you're going to get your bigger bang for the buck. But we can also go out and publicize the environmental benefits, the social benefits, the economic benefits to the smaller folks without having to mandate it through the legislature. You're seeing community solar farms pop up out of nowhere, and those are really 10 or 12 or 15 neighbors that got together and are buying stock in a solar panel. I think A Climate to Thrive, which has been set up here on Mount Desert Island, does a great job at getting information out about opportunities and the benefits of taking advantage of them. I think the legislature, it's going to be hard to get anybody to agree on anything for the next several years. So I don't know if that's the avenue that I would take right now.
Okay, thank you. Let me throw this one to Lydia. How are the changes that you're making or the actions that Unum Group is taking on sustainability being received by employees? Do you hear from them? Are they receptive to changes for the benefit of the environment?
Definitely. And I'm often in the position where I'm having to tell people, that's great. We need to slow down and take care of basics first. So I get questions on a daily basis about things like, what pesticides are we using on our grounds, and how are we approaching financial inequality within the communities that we operate in. And the employees are more than receptive and ready to go all in on this, which has been wonderful. And what we've often found is that in many cases, we're able to say, yes, go ahead, please go ahead with this initiative. And then in other cases, we do have to say, what's the baseline? And I think that that's something that we can all think about. And to build on John's point there is that sometimes the legislation won't be there to support us, but in that cases, we can always build the business case by looking at the long-term impacts that we see from climate change. And that if we don't address this, how it will impact our business. And that makes a really clear economic case for almost all instances of wanting to make change.
Okay. One last question here. I'm going to throw it to Megan and anybody else jump in. Could retailers join together to get market leverage that could be used to improve packaging? It needs to be recyclable or compostable.
Yeah, it's a great idea, and some of it's actually happening. So if we look globally, there's an initiative from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is based in the UK, that we're a member of, and Walmart's also a member, and Kroger and Target and a lot of other big retailers and big manufacturers and recycling companies. It's really across a number of sectors. And we've all made a joint commitment that by 2025, all of our plastic packaging will be either recyclable or compostable or reusable. And it's a huge lift. So this is something that's a little frightening maybe to do on our own as a company, a little easier, knowing that there's a big consortium also working on it, because there are so many elements in this. You need the packaging design to be better. So that's what we can work on with our suppliers. Reducing plastic, changing to more monomaterials, like more PET plastic and less of the plastics that are less easy to recycle. But then at the same time, we also need the recycling infrastructure to pick up. We need good recycling facilities, and we need that recycled material to go back into new packaging. So we're driving a more circular approach with plastics. So it's a great idea. There is some work happening. And I think we welcome any input from consumers and potential partners on this, because we need a lot of solutions to really get to a more circular economy for plastics.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are about 3 minutes away from closing and about 2 minutes from when I have to hand this back over to John. But let me ask in a lightning round, 30 seconds each, one piece of advice for people listening today. Ethan, start with you.
Well, I guess my advice would be to continue speaking up and making your feelings and your values known, because you know, we know that that can affect change for companies. Companies are listening to their consumers and their employees, and you know, it's driving them to do new and innovative things. So keep speaking up.
Okay. Lydia.
I'd say start with your baseline. Understand where you are today and where you can have the biggest impact, and tackle what you can and start somewhere.
Great. John?
Two things. I would say the first one, remember you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Little steps are cumulative, and they may not appear to be much while you're doing them, or the goal may be so massive that you think you can't get there, but you can. And the other thing would be to have projects queued up, much like Lydia said. Have people aggressively putting ideas forward. Have projects queued up, and when the financial incentive makes itself available, be ready to pounce on it and take advantage of it.
Okay. Megan.
Great. So I would add to all those great points. Put the climate, for those of you in business, put the climate change lens over your business and look at where are the risks that you face today and what might those look like in 10 or 20 or 30 years, and where are the opportunities for you to create a new service that doesn't exist today, to meet consumer needs that we know are going to be changing with climate, and really drive innovation. As John said, pick up the pace, move fast, and really keep climate change as a critical lens for how you manage your business.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I want to just take a moment to thank each of you, Ethan, Lydia, John, Megan, for joining us today. And it really is so heartening to see all of the innovative and exciting things that each of you are doing. And I hope that people in the audience, even if you're in a small business, have taken away something that you can use, because there's plenty to learn from your examples. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Cathy, and it's good to see you today. Glad you could make it. So thank all of you in the second panel. You can go ahead and turn your cameras off if you'd like to, or you can stay on the screen. Just for all of you attending, give me like 60 seconds to wrap this up. I would say one of the things that I don't know about all of you, one of the things I like about this format is the informality and what seems to me the honesty and the candor with all of the panelists, not just today, but last week as well. It gives me a sense of optimism. And I remember Adam Lee last week in his keynote said, you know, we can do this. We've done a lot harder things before. And I think the panelists today, you know, drive that point home that not only can we do this, but we have to do this. I would put in a plug for the next generation, or whatever the right term is, because we just, at the Maine climate table, we just brought on two, I guess technically Gen Zs onto our board. And as optimistic as we might feel, we've got a lot of work to do. And it's really nice to have these young voices helping to guide the direction of the Maine climate table going forward. And I would just encourage all of your organizations to engage that generation, put them in leadership positions, hear what they have to say. They will remind us we've got work to do, and fast. Just for queuing up next week, I'm just going to stay in Hannaford Hall. I mean, I'm just camping out here for the month. It's very comfortable. No one's here to bother me. But we'll be back next Wednesday, not Thursday, from 10 till noon. We'll be focusing on some homegrown Maine businesses. And also, as in the first panel and in the second panel, we'll be talking about workforce development in relation to climate. And I'm an ecologist by training. I know nothing about workforce development, but I'm telling you that is going to be a very interesting conversation with John Doerr and his panel next week. You do not want to miss it, no matter what your area of expertise is. So we're going to sign off for now. This is recorded. We'll put it on our website. It's available to anybody. And until next week, I'll see if I can get some food delivered here to Hannaford Hall, and we'll see you then. Thanks everybody for being present today. See you next week.